How's it going, guys? So now I am very excited to release a DSG two-wheel drive kit for the epic Honda NSX engine. That's the C30 or C32 engine. It's been coming on a while. Just couldn't find a block, and then there was a customer that so graciously sent us a block, and we've got the kit ready for those guys now. So let's just start off by saying that there is one small little area on this block that interferes with the midshaft. Okay, so I'm going to be explaining the adaption for the 250 box and the 500 box as well as we walk through it. So on the 250 box, the block requires this little half moon notch out of the block over here. It doesn't impact any structural strength at all, or you don't lose any bolt holes or anything like that. So now if you want that cut to be as neat as possible, so what I'm doing is I'm giving you a guide plate, which is that there, right? So I'm giving you that guide plate, which you can then tighten down, and I'm going to give you this extended hole saw cutter as well, which you just attach to a drill, slow speed with some cutting oil, and just run the cutter down that guide plate, and you will then have your hole looking like that. It's really not a big notch, but that's only on the 250 box. If you want to go with the 500 box, it requires much less cutting. In fact, I've just made a little dummy piece to show you how little it is. Okay, so I'm filling that back in. That used to be there, and now I'm showing you the tiny little notch that's required for the 500 box. It's probably about 3 millimeters of material that needs to come out. Okay, so just going to repeat, all of this remains in place for the 500 box. It's only this short little 3 millimeter notch that has to be removed. And once again, I will give you a guide plate to do that as well. I can just get it on. Okay, so this is a different guide plate, and once again you will just get a cutter with it. You drop your cutter down there, and it will shave that 3 mil off for you very accurately. So that's the trimming. That's the trimming that's required on this C30 block. Next up, we will move on to the assembly. Okay, so the main adapter will obviously drop straight onto your existing dowels. There's one dowel underneath there and one dowel underneath here somewhere. The plate drops straight on there. Tap it in lightly with a rubber mallet if need be. And then once you got those bolts tightened down with the supplied bolts, then you can go on to get your crank adapter on. The first one drops onto the crank. I don't have a crank in place here now, but this will drop straight onto your crank with your original flywheel bolts or ARPs. Once you got that torqued down, we go with your second adapter, which lines up there, and with the supplied bolts, torque that down to 64 Newton meters. Then you want to go on and put your dual mass flywheel on with your new bolts and torque that down to 64 Newton meters as well. And that drops straight on there. Just wanted to show you guys that this section over here, it was a request by actually two customers that requested I extend the adapter plate outwards over here for the purpose of attaching what would be engine mount. So that would be your front engine mount, or yeah, let's say the forward facing engine mount. So that material's nice and chunky, 20mm thick, couple of threads in there, and that's where you can attach your front mount. What else is there to say here is, okay, so with regards to the midshaft, okay, so the midshaft bracket, there's one specific for the 500 box and one specific for the 250 box. Okay, they have different offsets. In fact, in both directions they're slightly different. So this one's for the 500. They come with 2 bolts and then one stud and nut. So you got to first turn your stud in, then turn your nut on, while bringing the bracket closer and closer to the block, and then you get your other two bolts in. And this, the original CV cup, sorry, I just zoomed out there. So the original CV cup of the NSX, it's a nice fat chunky CV joint, which obviously means there's a big fat chunky side shaft that goes in here. So it was important to reuse this again. So this literally just pops straight onto my shaft, okay, and it will in fact terminate at exactly the same level as the OEM cup used to sit. And we did that so that if there was a chance that this engine DSG combo could go back into the NSX at exactly the same position from left to right, then that would mean you could then use the right rear side shaft, the OEM side shaft again. So we've catered for that. If it's possible or not, we don't know. Until somebody does the first actual swap, we won't know. But I've allowed for that. Okay, so what you want to do is get the shaft bolted down very loosely. Do not tighten those bolts yet, okay? Get it down very loosely, and so that the shaft can actually move around, okay? Now on the 500 box, you'll get the shaft with a seal nut positioned at an exact height with sealer behind it already. So you won't need to adjust the seal nut. It will be sealed already, okay? That's on the 500 box. When you're using the 500 box. When you're using the 250 box, you will have this sort of contraption on there, okay? This will just be randomly turned on, and this is your seal nut section, and what will happen is this will have to then be, once your gearbox is on, this will turn your original spring and cone that sat on your output flange on the DSG will now fit onto here. This goes onto the shaft, and you slacken it as far as possible before you put the box on. Once the box is on, tighten down, then you turn this up till your spring starts to bind. The moment you feel the spring binding, you then go an extra 7 millimeters of spring compression. And once you get to that point, you will have an extra lock nut underneath, which will lock everything together. Please don't forget that when you using the 250 box with this, you got to put sealer on this top thread here, and then that sealer will obviously seal off the oil from passing down the thread. But on the 500 box, I will pre-seal this and have it at the correct position. So as it is now, we've got a shaft that's positioned fairly loosely. We got the crank adapters on, flywheel bolted down, main adapter bolted down. And one last thing before we move on. On the 500, okay, on the 250 box, this is basically as far as you go. The 250 box with that seal nut that I showed you now earlier on. Once that's on there, that's as far as you go with the 250 box. You're now ready to put the box on and to complete the installation. But on the 500 box, we got to go a step further. So the 500 box has got an extra, what I'm calling an output adapter. Okay, this adapter blocks off where the transfer case would have sat on the DQ500 box. This is going to block off that area. Okay, so now remember, the seal nut came pre-positioned with sealer behind it. Now you're going to drop this. You're going to drop this output flange on there. Okay, so you got the output flange on there, and there's going to be two bolts. Well, there's actually 2, 4, 6 bolts in the packet with the output flange bolts. Now 2 of those bolts are going to go underneath through the block, underneath, one over there and one underneath there. Okay, so those 2 bolts will go in, and it will hold this output flange in place. Again, don't tighten those bolts, just leave it fairly loose, because you want this plate and the shaft to be able to move around a little bit when you're now ready to drop the gearbox on. Okay, so keep the plate as loose as possible and the shaft as loose as possible. Get the gearbox on, tighten the gearbox down, and then start to nip up everything. The last thing you want to tighten up is those 3 bolts on the mid-shaft bracket. So next up, we will have the gearbox attached to the engine assembly. Okay, so we got the DQ500 and the C30 block assembled now. Fits like a glove, really. You won't have any issues getting it together. And as you can see, I'll just show you that extension of the adapter plate where you can attach any mountings to. So you have over enough strength at the front there to attach a mounting that you could obviously make up custom. Let's have a look at that mid shaft. As you can see, at cup ends at exactly the same OEM spot. There's enough clearance around this area over here to get your rubber boot and clamp on without having to trim on the block. So there's enough clearance there. Bracket works well. If you just look inside there, you can just about see that seal nut sitting inside the seal. As I said, on the 500 shaft, that seal nut will come pre-positioned with sealer on the thread already, but not on the 250 shaft. And then these 2 bolts over here, I haven't countersunk them because I would assume that you would use these 2 bolts or these 2 holes to mount your rear mounting bracket. So I would normally we would use 2 or 3 or perhaps 2 of these, and then maybe 2 of these on the casing as well to form a rear mounting bracket. And what's also important to note is that the orientation of the block versus the DSG is perfectly level. So if you level up your block, it means that the DSG is also level. There was no need to change the orientation between the two. They're both perfectly in line. So you won't have any issues with your sumping skew on either of the two components. So that's it for the for the 500 assembly. I will shortly I'll shortly assemble it onto the 250 box, just to show you what that looks like. And the reason why I've done both adaptions for the 250 and the 500 is because I actually do have a customer that wanted it for a 250. Because the problem is the 500 boxes are extremely hard to find in some countries. They are sometimes 4 or 5 times more expensive than the 250 box. Also, the 500 box is fairly limited as far as controllers go. And then aftermarket supporting mods, there's also very few for the 500 box. So for many reasons, some guys will just not want to use the 500 box. And therefore I've provided an adaption kit for both situations. So shortly I'll get the 250 assembled. So for the DQ 250 assembly, you're going to get a different bracket on the shaft, which you will again start at this point and attach the bracket to the block. You're going to get it with this seal nut assembly fitted onto the shaft, just at a random height, and then a lock nut as well. So what you want to do first is fit the bracket on, then on your original DSG output flange, you're going to remove the spring cup and the brass cone, and you're going to slip that onto my seal nut. It goes on tight, but you'll get it on, and then you'll get your cup on there, and then your cone. Okay. Then what you want to do is you want to turn this assembly here. You want to turn it anti-clockwise as far as possible, so that seal nut just about touches the edge of the block there. So you want to get it as far back as possible after you've attached the bracket. Okay. Once you've done that and you've got your spring cup and cone on, then you're ready to get the 250 box onto the block. Also, I just wanted to show you before I put the gearbox on that on the 250 box, I've pointed out that there's the bigger of the notches are required on the 250 box. So I just wanted to show you how minimal that notch that's required is. It's really not a lot for the 250 box, and I mean I've probably got about 1.5 mil clearance around the block there for the shaft to clear there. So with the guide plate and the tool I'm supplying, you can get a nice neat cut down there, and you don't have to end up removing excessive material. But as you can see, that's the reason why that notch is so big for the 250 setup. But again, it's not a lot. And then obviously with the 250 setup, we don't use this extended output flange adapter. So those two holes are are not required for the 250 setup. Okay, doesn't affect strength at all. And also, just to point out, for this NSX 250 swap, this DSG swap, this protrusion on the 250 box, it's not required for you to mold this flat. Okay, we've managed to actually do this adaption without the need for removing that obstruction. So usually most of the DSG adaption kits, this needs to be molded flat, as well as those two points there, and then usually that gets tapped a 10 by 1.5. But in this case, there's no work required. You can basically just take a stock box and drop it straight onto this adapter, reusing that existing seal. Obviously just put a new seal in. But yeah, everything stays exactly the same, nothing gets changed for the 250 swap on the NSX block. I also wanted to point out that when using the 250 box, because the shaft actually gets much closer to the block itself, meaning that the CV cup now gets closer to the block, meaning that we have less space for the rubber boot and clamp around this cup. So let me just show you the clearance that we have. It's about 5 millimeters, say 4 millimeters of clearance around the cup. Okay, so I think it's going to be a touch too little for the rubber boot and the clamp. So you're probably going to have to just nip about 3 millimeters off there and off that little corner to get your boot and clamp to clear the block. And again, just a reminder, this is only on the 250 where we have this issue. Okay, and then there we have the 250 box sitting nicely on the NSX block. Uses exactly the same adapter plate, just doesn't use that extra output flange adapter, doesn't use that. So again, you can see that there's some material there for your mounting on the front. And then just to show you on the shaft itself. So once you've got the box on tightened down, you then want to turn the seal nut assembly, you want to turn it clockwise while holding the shaft still, so that seal nut moves upwards. And if you look underneath, you will see the seal and the seal nut. That basically needs to line up flush. So turn your seal nut clockwise until the seal nut and the seal is in line. And remember, while you're turning this clockwise, you're compressing the spring as well, which is what we want to do. Once you feel the spring binding initially, there'll be about a 7 millimeter compression of the spring. And at that point, more or less, you'll have the seal nut sitting flush with the seal underneath here. And once you got that correct, just bring your lock nut up and lock the two together, and then you're ready to actually tighten these 3 bolts on the bracket at the bottom. And then, as they say, Bob's your uncle. That's your final assembly. I do want to say that we have there's 1 or 2 customers that are potentially going to be able to offer a mounting kit, perhaps side shafts as well, and even possibly the plug and play as far as electrical side of things goes. So in reality, at the end of the day, at some point in time, there's going to be a turnkey solution, a complete turnkey solution. I would have loved to have offered that two NSX guys, but unfortunately, down in the south, these NSXs are very scarce, and I will not be able to find one where I can do a donor swap on. So for me offering that is just going to be impossible. So we're going to rely on someone out there to develop a turnkey solution. But for the guys that's ambitious, this is your starting point. Get your adaption kit, get your engine DSG nested in your engine bay, start fabbing up some mounts. Once you got your mounts done, you can measure for your side shafts, and then I'll gladly be able to offer those side shafts for you once you've measured them, and I can guide you as to how to measure them, and then I can definitely offer you side shafts. Well, the aim is for us to reuse the right rear side shaft, OEM1, but we wouldn't know until somebody actually physically goes and tries to do the swap. So I can definitely help you with side shafts. Electrical side of things, I can guide you a lot with what needs to be done. It's not rocket science. By now, things are so simplified with DSG control. It's unreal. And so I can guide you a lot. There's no need to wait for some shop or someone to create a plug-and-play kit or turnkey solution. There's no real need for that unless you just really have no skills at all and you don't want to rely on your local shops or anything like that. So I can definitely guide you if you've got some skills and time. But that's about it for the NSX, long awaited. Thanks a lot for watching, and hopefully we'll get some. I'm eager to see the first NSX rolling down the road with a dual clutch box. So come on, guys, the race is on.